Have you ever seen someone humiliated just for looking different? Maybe because you wear unusual clothes, walk too slowly, or simply don't fit into the modern hustle and bustle pattern. What if I told you that sometimes behind an old uniform hides a story that could change the way you see the world? What happened on that bus on any given morning was more than an ordinary everyday scene. It was one of those moments that seem small but carry enormous weight. An elderly man came up through the front door, holding a cane, his gaze calm, and wearing an old military uniform. It wasn't a carnival costume, nor a costume. It was part of his life. And it was clean, impeccable, but weathered. Just like him. The passengers looked. Some disguised it. But deep inside, a group of teenagers laughed loudly. Muffled laughter, cell phones being discreetly held up, fingers pointing with contempt. A regrettably common scene. And you? What would you do if you were there? Stay with me until the end, because what happened after that might affect you too. The scene was uncomfortable. The driver didn't even make a gesture. Nobody offered a place. The veteran, despite visible difficulty, remained standing. His eyes swept the interior of the bus, not in search of pity, but with the firmness of someone who has faced horrors much greater than the contempt of strangers. He didn't say a word. And perhaps, precisely because of this, his presence spoke louder than any response. With each jolt of the vehicle, he pressed his cane against the floor, maintaining his balance. A boy, sitting with headphones in his ears, turned up the volume and started laughing at what he saw on his cell phone screen. I recorded everything. An old uniform on a tired body seemed worthy of mockery to them. What those young people didn't know was that that same fabric carried dust from battlefields. That those faded insignia were once in lands where many did not return. They were mocking a past they knew nothing about, and a man who, inside, was still fighting battles every day. Have you ever witnessed this kind of silent injustice? When does someone who should be honored end up invisible? Or worse, ridiculed? The minutes seemed to drag by. The noise of the engine mixed with muffled laughter and the sounds of cell phone notifications. The veteran kept his gaze steady, not at the young people, but at the ground. His thoughts, perhaps, were far from there. Perhaps reliving memories of a time when he was called a hero. Where wearing that uniform was a source of pride, not mockery. But what no one there imagined was that that moment was about to change. A discreet twist, but capable of silencing any judgment. And it would all start with a simple detail. An unexpected move. A muffled sound. And then, the unexpected flash of a truth that could no longer be ignored. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. And then it happened. A stronger jolt made the veteran's small bag slip from his hands. She fell to the ground with a dry, heavy thud. Everyone looked. Maybe out of curiosity, maybe out of reflex. One of the young people came forward, still with his cell phone in hand, ready for another mocking recording. But as she bent down to pick up her bag, something slid out. Something no one expected to see on the dirty floor of a crowded bus. They were medals. Real, brilliant, authentic. One of them gleamed with an unmistakable golden glow. The boy froze. The other's eyes widened. There was no more laughter, just silence. The veteran's hand shook slightly as he collected one of the decorations. And then, for the first time, one of the young men asked, "Is that a bronze star?" The atmosphere changed. What was a mockery turned into amazement. What was shame became respect. At that moment, the entire bus seemed to understand that there wasn't an old man in costume there. There was a real hero who had been ignored until then. And you know, maybe you've already experienced something similar. Maybe you felt that the world around you doesn't see your struggles, your history, your value. If this topic makes sense to you, leave here in the comments what has touched you most so far. It is in the comments that we meet, recognize each other, and build together this community that values what really matters. Like this video if, in some way, this story moved you. This shows me that it's worth continuing to bring stories that inspire, question, and touch people deeply. And if you want to continue on this journey with me, subscribe to the channel here. It's simple, but it makes a huge difference. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content that almost no one else has the courage to share. Now, with the bus still moving and eyes fixed on that man who until then was invisible, something even bigger was about to happen. The bus continued on its route as on any other morning. People going to work, eyes glued to their screens, headphones silencing the real world. But for him, each step inside was more than just moving. It was resistance. It was dignity supported by a cane and an invisible force that most there would never understand. While balancing himself between the bumps and the indifference around him, the veteran maintained an upright posture, like someone who has walked much more dangerous roads. Time had marked his body, but it had not bowed his soul. He didn't look around in anger or sadness. I just accepted it, like someone who has already learned that expecting recognition is a luxury that not everyone can have. There was something sacred about that silence. A silence that did not ask for pity, but that carried stories that no one inside seemed willing to hear. With each sudden break, he held on tighter, and the bag swayed at his side. The young people's laughter still echoed, but they seemed more nervous than amused. Something in the air was changing. It was as if, little by little, that man began to occupy a space that no one had authorized, but that everyone, in some way, felt belonged to him. The minutes passed, but the time inside that bus seemed different. It wasn't just the veteran's body that was being put to the test, it was also the collective mindset of everyone there. The simple fact that a man was wearing an old military uniform aroused more ridicule than respect. This reveals a lot about the way we look at the past, at symbols, at those who once gave their all in the name of values that today seem forgotten. It's curious how the truth can be right before our eyes and still go unnoticed. How is it possible to carry medals in your pocket and continue to be ignored? The answer may lie in something deeper. We are trained to react only to what shines, what screams, what draws attention with force. But what about that which carries a discreet, silent glow? And what about what is not displayed, but imposes itself with presence? That man was presence. And that bothered me. Because he didn't ask for space, but he occupied it. He didn't ask for respect, but he awakened. And when something real starts to bother you, it's because it's touching where there's a disconnect. It was as if he represented a type of courage that you don't see around anymore. A courage that does not need an audience or approval. A courage that comes from what has been experienced, not from what is posted. He was still there, standing firm, silent. But every second in that position became a reminder. Respect is not demanded, it is earned. And even when the world tries to ridicule, there is one thing that cannot be erased: legacy. The legacy that doesn't go away with laughter, that doesn't get dirty with crooked looks, that does not depreciate over time. A legacy that lies in posture, in the choice to move forward even when everyone moves away, which is the decision to continue being who you are, even if no one else cares. At that moment, a small drop of sweat ran down the veteran's temple. The sun shone through the side window of the bus, illuminating his face like a focal point. And it was only there that one of the teenagers realized that man wasn't just another passenger. He was a presence that was testing everyone's conscience. A mirror that, without saying anything, reflected truths that no one wanted to face. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because what was about to happen would not just be a change in attitude, but a real transformation. One of those moments that expose, without warning, everything that is hidden behind the scenes of our culture, our view, our way of judging others. And it all started with a simple, almost invisible detail, but with an impact that no one would be able to forget. Comment there. That makes sense to me. That image of him there, standing on the bus, saying nothing, was just the surface. Behind that silence, there was a dense past, full of scars that cannot be seen on the skin. And if anyone there had paid more attention to that man's eyes, they would have seen that they carried much more than the tiredness of age. They carried memories of a time where survival was a daily battle, and fear came with the sunrise. It was in the eyes that the war lived that no one inside knew about. The uniform, worn out by time, was not just an old piece of clothing. It was a reminder of what had already been lived, of what had already been lost. The fabric that provoked laughter today was the same one that was once wet with sweat, blood and tears in unknown fields. Muddy trenches, sleepless nights, comrades who never returned. That war still pulsed inside, even if the world around had forgotten that it ever existed. And when we talk about war, we're not just talking about bombs and bullets. We are talking about difficult decisions, of real sacrifices, of an internal transformation that marks forever. Every step taken there, on that bus, carried the weight of having returned alive when many were left along the way. And there's no way to get out of something like this unscathed. The pain of loss, the constant pressure, the responsibility of protecting those next to you. All of this shapes the soul in a way that does not fade over time. It's curious how people's hidden truth goes unnoticed in the rush of everyday life. We come across so many faces every day and judge in seconds without knowing what's behind them. But real life isn't made of appearances, it's made of layers. And there were layers to that man that no one there had any interest in knowing. Until that moment. Inside his head, as the bus continued its journey, perhaps the memories were coming back in short, intense flashes. The smell of gunpowder, the distant sound of explosions, the radio screeching urgent commands, the screams of companions, the tightness in the chest when the letter from home arrived, the biting cold of nights in enemy territory, and, even with all this, the need to remain firm, to keep the line. Because giving up was never an option. Many people look at veterans and only see what is left. They see old age, slowness, out-of-fashion clothes. But few have the sensitivity to see what survived, what was won, what was carried there with strength and honor. And this reveals much more about the mentality of our generation than about them. It reveals how we are losing the ability to recognize true greatness. And the truth is that there is a battle going on even after the war is over. The battle of trying to fit into a world that seems to have no place for you anymore. To live with the behind the scenes of memory, while everything around spins non-stop. The silent struggle of those who have given their all, and now just hope to be seen as someone who still matters, which still has value. That still carries a story that deserves to be remembered. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because the way that truth came to light was so simple, so unexpected, that no one there was prepared. And yet, it was enough to silence the laughter, turn heads, and transform an ordinary trip into an unforgettable lesson about empathy, humility, and recognition. Right there. I'm on this journey too. Perfect. As the previous excerpt is around 3,450 characters, I will now continue directly with approximately 5,000 characters, faithfully following the style and instructions. The bus braked more abruptly. The veteran's hands, already weakened by time, were unable to hold on tight. The bag slipped and fell with a muffled sound. Some passengers looked out of instinct, others out of boredom. But no one expected what came next. One of the young people, the same one who had just moments before been laughing, stood up somewhat by reflex, perhaps still trapped by the impulse to make a joke. But as she bent down to pick up her bag, something slid through the half-open zipper. Small pieces of metal glittered on the floor of the bus. Medals. Authentic military medals. The first reaction was silence. A heavy, disconcerting silence, as if a veil had been torn right before everyone's eyes. The boy stood still for a moment, looking at the objects as if he didn't know what to do. The medals were there, spread across the dirty floor, shining with a dignity that contrasted brutally with the indifference of seconds before. He bent down and picked one up carefully, his fingers shaking. He read an inscription that he didn't fully understand, but that he knew, from the tone, the weight, the silent energy that emanated from there, that it wasn't just anything. "Bronze Star Medal," he murmured, without really understanding, but with his eyes already revealing that something inside him was beginning to change. Little by little, the other young people also fell silent. One of them, who until then had been laughing harder, took the earphone out of his ear. The driver looked in the rearview mirror. The entire atmosphere of the bus was taken by a kind of collective pause. It was as if time had slowed down, just so everyone could see what had always been there, but no one had noticed. The truth didn't come screaming. It arrived with the faint sound of a bag falling, and the subtle glow of something that represented sacrifice, honor, and history. The veteran bent down with difficulty, picked up the remaining medals, and carefully replaced them in the bag. At no point did he express anger, shame, or any kind of resentment. He just thanked the young man with a nod, serene, firm, like someone who has seen much more than that, and still chooses to respond with dignity. And it was precisely this gesture, this silent choice, that made the biggest impact. It wasn't just about medals there. It was the revelation of a truth that was buried beneath haste and prejudice. That bag contained more than metal objects. It carried memories, names, battles, losses, victories, and a legacy that no one there had cared to know about until then. The transformation in the eyes of those present did not happen because they were forced to respect. It happened because they realized, clearly and directly, how much they had made a mistake in judging what they did not understand. And this raises a question that goes beyond that scene. How many times do we do the same thing? How many times do we mock, ignore, or devalue someone without knowing the journey that person has had? We live in a culture that venerates youth, speed, appearance, but that forgets the value that exists in experience, silence, and history. The impact that moment had on that bus was living proof that a few seconds of truth are enough to deconstruct an entire mentality based on ignorance. It's interesting how such a small detail can bring about such a profound change. But it's not about the size of the action. It's about the symbolic weight it carries. The medals on the floor didn't speak, but they said everything. They showed that arrogance gives way when the truth prevails. They showed that disrespect arises from a lack of conscience, but that conscience, once awakened, has the power to transform. That bus became a learning stage. No screaming, no speeches. Just with the contrast between the superficiality of those who judge and the depth of those who lived. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the way those young people reacted after that reveals much more than an apology. It shows how true respect is not taught with words, but awakened by experiences that mark the soul. Comment there. That makes sense to me. The silence was now complete. A silence that no longer came from ignorance, but from impact. The young man who, until minutes before, was laughing, now stared blankly at the object in his hand. The medal weighed more than it looked. And it wasn't the weight of the metal, it was the weight of the story. The golden glow reflected not only the light that entered through the bus window, but also a hidden truth that no one there had stopped to see until then. This here. Is it a bronze star? He asked, as if trying to confirm what he already felt, even without understanding all the details. The veteran nodded with a slight smile, without vanity, without the need to justify himself. Just a simple gesture, but it said more than any explanation. That smile broke something. A kind of invisible pride that supported the arrogance of those who mocked. Because when someone responds with humility to contempt, the effect is disconcerting. There is no defense against silent dignity. And the young man felt it. He kept his cell phone in his pocket, as if hiding a newly discovered shame. He didn't apologize right away. Maybe because he didn't know how. Maybe because he was still digesting everything. But the way he looked at the veteran now was completely different. There was no more mockery. There was respect. There was confusion, yes, but also a beginning of understanding. Other passengers, realizing what was happening, began to watch more closely. That figure that was previously invisible was now at the center of a scene that no one expected to experience that day. The driver looked in the rearview mirror again and instinctively turned down the radio volume. It was as if the entire environment had changed frequency. A new energy took over the space. an energy of consciousness. It is in these moments that the mentality changes, not out of obligation, but out of impact. When the truth appears strongly enough, it does not need to be imposed. She simply reveals herself, and the effect of this is immediate. Laughter disappears, judgment dissolves, and the human being who was hidden behind the armor of ignorance begins to awaken. That's exactly what happened there. The eyes of the young people, previously occupied with judging, were now occupied with understanding. It was as if time had stopped to offer a lesson, not with scolding, but with presence. The veteran, even though he was aware of what he had caused, remained calm. He took back his medals, put them away carefully, and placed the bag on his lap. There was no hurt on his face, just that tranquility that only those who have seen the worst can carry. I didn't need to prove anything. He didn't need to explain himself. He was. And being was enough. This type of transformation is rare because it requires a deep break. A break in the way we were trained to look at each other. Mockery is often a defense, a shield against what we don't understand. But when what is before us is indisputable, when the truth appears with a face, with a history, with evidence that speaks for itself, the shield falls. The mind opens. And it is at this exact moment that learning comes in. The journey that unfolded there was not just one of an older man facing the scorn of young people. It was a journey of revelations, emotional behind the scenes, of past decisions that, even after decades, still carry consequences. And it's impossible not to think about how many other people, every day, experience something similar. Not on a bus necessarily, but in their homes, at their jobs, on their streets. People who carry giant stories while the world treats them as if they were invisible. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because what that group did next may seem simple at first glance, but it carries such a strong meaning that it has the power to transform anyone who is attentive enough to see it. Comment there. That makes sense to me. The gesture was small, almost shy, but full of meaning. The young man who had previously been holding his cell phone, now with his eyes filled with something new, perhaps regret, perhaps admiration, stood up and offered his seat. It wasn't just an act of education. It was the beginning of an internal change. A silent recognition that he had been wrong, that I had judged without knowing. And in that simple movement of giving up his seat, he also delivered an apology that he might never have been able to put into words. The veteran accepted with a slight nod, without pride, but with dignity. He sat down calmly, as if he no longer expected anything, but still knew how to recognize when change was beginning to happen. And when he sat down, something strange happened in the room. It was as if the entire bus stopped to watch a moment of raw truth unfold in front of everyone. One of those scenes that no one records, but that remains etched in memory. One by one, the other youths began to move. Without anyone asking, they also stood up. Some moved away from the back of the bus and stood. Others just lowered their heads, respectful. Even the driver up front noticed. He looked in the rearview mirror, sighed discreetly, and turned the radio knob, muting the music playing. Now, everything was silent. But it was a different silence. It was no longer uncomfortable or empty. It was the kind of silence that carries weight, that shows respect. That trip, which began as a common repetition of urban routine, had turned into a lesson about humanity. Nobody planned it, nobody rehearsed it. And maybe that's why it was so true. It's curious how the transformation happens in the details. There were no speeches, there was no shouting, just a look, a medal, a gesture. And this type of change, when it comes like this, has more force than any imposition, because it happens from the inside out. The truth, when shown simply, breaks down walls that no words could break. And at that moment, it was as if everyone there had been forced to review the way they see each other, reflecting on the unconscious decisions they make every day when they judge without knowing, when they mock without understanding, when they turn their faces to those who carry invisible baggage. This type of impact is rare, not because there is a lack of stories like this in the world, but because most of them pass by too quickly to notice. We live in a rush that tramples on meaning. Everything is fleeting. Everything is immediate. Everything needs to be quick, beautiful, and edited. But real life is not just made up of what appears. Life also happens behind the scenes, in silences, in small expressions, in what is not said, but is deeply felt. And perhaps that was the greatest gift of that morning. A reminder that true respect can't be bought. It can't be demanded. It can be earned. And gaining respect today requires courage. Courage to be who you are, even when the whole world doesn't seem to value it. Courage to maintain your posture, even when everyone around you is laughing. Courage to carry your past with honor, even if it seems out of place in the present. That's what that man showed. And that was what touched silently each of those who were there. It wasn't about the uniform. It was about what he stood for. It wasn't about the shine of the medals. It was about what they carried. And it wasn't about a vacant seat on the bus. It was about a space that needed to be given back. The space of memory, of consideration, of reverence. The young man sat down again, now in another place, closer to the door. His eyes were different. Not because he had cried, but because they had seen something that made him see things differently. Maybe he wouldn't tell anyone that. Maybe he kept it to himself. But the truth is that he would never forget that scene. Because once consciousness is touched, there is no going back to ignorance without feeling the weight of what has been revealed. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because what happened after that wasn't just the end of a bus ride. It was the beginning of a new way of seeing life. And the way it manifested itself was even more surprising than anything that had happened so far. Right there. I'm on this journey too. The bell rang and the bus slowed down. The veteran stood up calmly, without rushing, with the same serenity he had maintained since the beginning. Nobody said anything. No words were necessary. The silence, once again, said it all. He adjusted his bag on his shoulder, looked around the interior of the vehicle as if saying goodbye without wanting to attract attention, and walked towards the door. But before going down, he did something that, at first glance, seemed simple. But that would leave a deep mark. On the bench he had just left, he placed a small, folded piece of paper. Nothing flashy, no theatrical gestures. Just the lightness of someone who understands that sometimes what needs to be said can be said in a few words. The door opened. He went down the steps carefully and stepped onto the sidewalk as if finishing a cycle. Outside, the wind blew lightly, gently swaying the fabric of the old uniform. The medals on his chest were still there, discreet, but shining with a light that now, finally, everyone could see. Inside the bus, the paper remained there for a few seconds, untouched. Until one of the young people approached. He took the note, read it in a low voice, and felt the impact of those simple words. Thank you that there are still hearts that learn. It was as if that sentence had been written directly for him. And in a way, it was. Because he had laughed. He had judged. But he had also learned. I had felt firsthand the power of humility, of presence, of history. And that hit me deeply. It's incredible how, even without saying anything, certain people can teach us more than years of theory. And that man, with his old uniform and slow steps, did just that. He didn't need to raise his voice. His experience spoke for him. And perhaps this is the greatest power anyone can have, to bring about transformation just by being who they are, by upholding their truth with courage, even in the face of contempt. The image of him walking down the sidewalk, slowly moving away, was recorded. Some passengers still followed him with their eyes, as if they didn't want to let him go so soon. And this was not out of curiosity, but out of respect. A type of respect that is not born from fear or imposition, but from the deep understanding that we are faced with something rare. From someone rare. A silent hero who didn't need to count his medals. They spoke for him. And more than that, his posture, his peace, his patience in the face of ignorance shouted the truth that no one there could ignore. The emotional journey that unfolded inside that bus was about much more than war veterans. It was about values, about character, about how we choose to look at others. It was about decisions, Not the ones we make out loud, but the internal ones which define who we really are. Because the truth is that every day we come across people who have stories that we have no idea about. People who, like that veteran, walk among us with invisible medals on their chests. Medals for overcoming, for fighting, for resistance. But we don't see it. Because you don't know how to look. Or because you don't want to. And this is where the transformation lies. When we decide to get out of automatic mode. When we stop, breathe, and look more deeply. When we understand that each face has a behind the scenes, that each step has a context, that each silence can be a scream stuck in the throat. The impact of that veteran's final gesture was like a silent signature on a lesson everyone had just learned. It wasn't goodbye, it was a reminder, a call to conscience. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because understanding what really transforms us requires more than observing. It requires feeling, reflecting, and acting. And this story, which seemed like just one of many, opened a door that could take us to a completely new place. Comment there. That makes sense to me. If you've made it this far, it's because something in this story touched you in some way. Maybe it reminded me of someone. Maybe it awakened something inside that had been forgotten. And if that happened, then this journey was worth telling. This channel exists for that reason, to bring stories that are not just told, but felt. If this type of content makes sense to you, sign up here to continue following with us. There are a lot of important things to share, a lot of truth yet to be told. And if you want to be present here in the comments, right here. This message was for me. So I know that you walked to the end, and that we followed together until here. Also leave a like if you felt there was a connection. If any part made you stop and think. This helps the channel reach more people who, like you, are open to stories with purpose. And if you want to follow along with me, there's a video here that complements this conversation. Click there and continue on this journey. We meet there. How many times have you ignored someone who deserved to be remembered? Comment honor if this story touched you. And share so that more people learn to recognize a true hero.